All right, welcome back from your coffee break, anyone. I'm really excited for this last panel of our conversation, which is about how to build meaningful patient partnerships in research. The format for this conversation is a panel discussion, after which we will have time for a Q&A. Just a reminder that you can submit your questions on Slido, but you can also raise your hand and we'll go around with microphones as before. Now, please join me in welcoming your panel moderator to the stage, Chiara Antoniani, who is Community Engagement and EU Projects Manager at Lung Cancer Europe. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Happy to be here, but I'm more happy to welcome the panel.
Yeah. So please join me in welcoming to the stage our panelists. So we have Nicoline Erhardt, who is board member at Lung Cancer Europe, Seijo Maceiras, who is principal investigator and director of the Department of Pulmonology, Clínica, Universidad de Navarra in Madrid. Welcome back to the stage, Febe Van Maldegem, associate professor, Amsterdam University Medical Center in the Netherlands. And welcome back to the stage, Roxane Chen, who is a PhD student at the University of Cambridge. Thank you all for joining us, and Chiara, the stage is yours.
Thank you. So we are here today to speak about patient partnership in research. And this is a theme that is very close to my heart because I have been a researcher before and I really missed the chance to have patient involvement. So in a way, I want to do it better now. And that's why I think it's very important to bring together a diverse prospective panel because we will hear from the patient perspective, from a clinician perspective, and from researchers. Researchers that are Febe in more an advanced career role, and then we have Roxane from a PhD perspective, that it was exactly where I was when I missed the chance. So I will start this conversation with you, Luis, because I think something is going on, and I mean, there are improvements going on, but I'm just curious to ask you, what is the role of a clinician in facilitating partnership in research? And with research, I mean different types of the research. So you can ask my question more into your clinical research practice, if you have examples that we can use to learn from.
So as clinicians or clinician researchers, because obviously there are clinicians who do no research whatsoever, and there are people who just do research and don't do any clinical practice, we obviously have options, and it's challenging because we have options to do research that is basic science research. We have options to do clinical research. We have chances to do something that's in between, such as translational research, and then we have clinician or researcher-derived initiatives, and then we have industry-derived initiatives, and that also it's tricky because of the resources that are devoted to all of this, and you know, we struggle with all of this because there's clearly a complex, an industrial complex that has been built in academic centers around research, and we've seen this in the United States where there's a crisis in terms of what are we funding, who are we funding, and is that money well spent, and should we challenge that and do it in a disruptive way, the way it's being done, or should we do it in a more rational way? So it's a very challenging scenario right now for a clinical researcher. I do it all. I collaborate with industry and industry-led projects, which are usually therapeutic. I collaborate with basic scientists, who I'm very proud of, such as Febe and Luis Montuenga, who also is in space-time, for example, and they're very knowledgeable and very dedicated to the bench side. And I collaborate with people who work in my field, which is more clinical translational research, and I come up with my own ideas to do research. So very challenging, very exciting, and very rewarding.
But in all of these, how you work to integrate also the patient perspective? Because this, I think, is also the next challenge. You collaborate with all these partners, but where are the patients?
So the patients are everywhere. And obviously, it was a very interesting talk about shared decision-making, because most clinical trials, I would argue, there is very little shared decision-making. I think a lot of clinicians see signing the informed consent as something that's just a hassle, rather than something that is vital to to the the benefit that the patient can obtain from that particular clinical trial. Fortunately, there's a movement certainly in grant applications to implicate the patients. So, for example, in Spanish national grants, we have to justify that there's patient involvement in the clinical grant trial. For example, I work very closely in Cassandra, which is our national lung cancer screening pilot trial with the AACC, which is the Spanish Association of Cancer, and also the CAP, which is the Spanish Association of those affected by lung cancer. And they are very active, and they're advocates. One thing that I've discovered with patients in clinical research is that they are listened to more so than we are. So when you deal with the administration, with authorities, they listen more to the patients than they listen to the researchers, because we are seen as interested parties in the research, even if it's just led by us, not necessarily industry. But the patient is heard and listened to, and they've become very powerful advocates for us in advancing research.
Okay, this is a good perspective, and I hope this happens in many other centers, not just Spain, because it's not what we hear often, that patients are everywhere. I think patients are really struggling to be everywhere, but sometimes they are missed, at least. But we will have the chance to hear Nicolene's perspective, that we can learn from her. Yes. But before going to Nicolene, I would like to ask a question to Roxane, because we spoke a lot, and you have really an interesting way of engaging patients in your research. Can you tell a little bit more about that? Because, yeah, it's very unique, the way you do it, and I think it's a good example that everyone needs to hear.
Sure. Is it? Okay. So I'm a PhD student at the University of Cambridge. I'm at my first year. But before that, I was a medical student at Imperial College London, which is when my dad was diagnosed with ALK-positive non-small cell lung cancer. So then that's why I decided to take a break from my medical studies to do a PhD in ALK-positive non-small cell lung cancer. And a lot of my PhD is actually based on his experience. So my dad was what we call a bad ALK. So he progressed very quickly through all the lines of ALK TKIs. And every time we did a biopsy, there were no ALK mutations. So it was probably due to bypass resistance mutations, which is why I'm looking at bypass resistance mutations in my PhD. And the other thing from his journey was that he struggled a lot with a lot of different side effects from all of the different lines of treatment. And that really, I saw that really affected his quality of life, but at the end, it also affected some of his treatment decisions, like dose reductions or discontinuation and what he wanted to do when he progressed. And a lot of it was based on quality of life, which is why for my second part of the PhD, I'm looking at understanding the side effects of ALK TKIs, really being able to say, how these side effects happen, what is the pathophysiology behind it, so mechanism work, and hopefully this will lead to better treatments and better quality of life while taking those drugs. So I think my journey is a bit unconventional because I have this personal lived experience, but also I have this amazing ALK-positive UK community who really are an inspiration. They were so supportive. So when I was in my master's and I was applying for a PhD, one of the first things I did was actually say, I have these ideas about a PhD, and then sent it in the support group and asked, what do you think about that? Because from my perspective, I'm doing this PhD for people like my dad, so it doesn't make sense for me not to ask people who are going to be affected or benefiting from, hopefully, the PhD to not ask their opinion. And I think maybe this is a more translational clinical side of me saying that. So now I've started the PhD. I have my own focus group that's made of ALK-positive non-small cell lung cancer patients. And they've helped me design a survey that's very comprehensive on all the ALK TKI side effects, but most importantly, which ones impact quality of life more than others. So anyone can Google the list of side effects for each TKI, but that doesn't mean I have the time or the money or the resources to then go and investigate every single one of them. So I want to focus on the ones that impact quality of life the most. And to do that, I need you, the patients, to tell me what I should focus on and which one's the most valuable for you. So that's what the focus group is doing. and they're also helping me keep a bigger picture on the science. So I think it's quite easy to get lost and follow little leads, but actually having a focus group to talk to really helps me just thinking about a problem. And it also just helps me get through the many, many failed experiments because at the end of the day, I know what I'm aiming for. Yeah.
Yeah, when I heard this story, I said, wow, this is amazing, and this is how I would have loved to run my PhD, which it was more close in a lab, doing experiments and not speaking with patients who were potentially benefiting on my research, but in some years. Because this is another question that I have, and this is more for Febe. And we heard about you speaking about space-time. We are involved, myself and Nicolene, so we know that you are doing your best to integrate patient perspective. But we also had a discussion, and it was a nice one, because sometimes it's really also hard to integrate patient perspective in more basic research than translational one, because, you know, like research is less close to patients when you do basic research. But can you just bring your perspective and explain to us what you are doing in space-time, but also how do you see this point? I mean, what are the struggles in basic research, but also what are the benefits of involvement?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's a huge challenge to involve patients from basic research perspective. I think a lot of scientists don't even think that this, you know, this basic science is something to involve patients in, because what they do is usually very complex work, very technical or in detail. You need a lot of knowledge about the topic to be able to explain it to somebody. And yeah, that is often already a reason why basic scientists may think that actually it's too far from the bed of the patient to that there's a need to engage them. And secondly, what I often struggle with as well is when I talk about my research with patients, is that the expectations of the timelines are very different. Patients expect or hope that what I do in the lab now will reach the patient within 2, 3, 4 years. But actually, this is not true. This may reach a journal in 2, 3 years, but it will reach the patient in maybe 15 years if we're lucky, because all the, you know, when we find a biomarker, we have to clinically validate it. It will have to be produced in a safe way, or there's a whole range of things that need to happen before it reaches a patient. And so these expectations are usually not aligned. But I think that's exactly why we should communicate, because it is good that patients are interested in what we do, but also we need to have realistic expectations from each other. And I think that's also one of the things where we work on in space-time, that we try to communicate our work in an understandable way. But I also find that I'm getting something back, because when I talk with patients, I find out that actually there are things that matter to them that I didn't think about. For example, we select a certain group of patients for our studies, and I get questions as to why. Why do you focus on KRAS mutant and not on ALK? Or why do you use mouse models in your work? Or what will it mean if we find this biomarker? Do patients need to get additional biopsies or bigger biopsies? And these are questions that I never thought about before. And they're so relevant, because we can, stay in our little bubble in the lab and find the best biomarker. But if it never has the potential to reach the clinic, it's useless. So we need to think about all these steps ahead of time. And that's why I think getting the patient perspective and think about all these pathways to implementation is really important.
Thank you, Febe. Yeah, I know how hard it is, but I also know how hard you are trying to get it done properly. So, and we also are grateful, because what we see sometimes is that research is also hard to be understood but just because the language is different. It's like if we speak another totally different language. But I think also you are trying to simplify as much as you can, you know. So every time we have people understanding that is like communication is another big barrier to involvement, then I think things change, you know, like we are not stuck anymore, we start getting involved, we understand, and therefore you see the benefit of it. But I'm also now curious, after hearing all this perspective, what's your perspective, Nicolene? Because I know how much you are involved. Also, we heard before from Professor Wolf, and we know that you are working together. So what's your experience in all this research? What do you consider a good partnership, patient partnership in research? And is it real? Is it happening? Or you see it as a struggle?
I really would say it depends. It's yes, it's working. No, it is. I think it depends. Some years ago, it was just you know, you have to have patient involvement to get the money. It was on paper, but it didn't happen really. I see there's a development, but I also see that there's a development in patient organizations, because as we always say, this is lived experience and things like that, but to my experience, it's always helpful to be a little bit educated as a patient advocate. Some countries already provide programs for patients in research, which I think is really important so that you can understand how it works, how are the procedures, things like that. And in Germany, we experienced that we really could work on an eye level with a lot of researchers, because they know that we know what we are talking about. This doesn't mean that you have to be a medical expert, but you should understand what is it all about. And even if it's quite vague, but you have to know something about it, and you should know how is the process, what do they have to do in all the things until there's a new drug. But it's not only a drug, and this is, I think, really important, because it's not just only interesting for us to have new drugs. We need to have access, we need to find the best way of care and things like that. There are also trials, there are also studies. And this is something where we all can participate. And another thing is that still there are too many researchers who send in a letter and say, okay, please write on the left or right side, it depends in which country you live probably, and send it back. And you will never ever hear of this person again, because this person has what he or she wants. You're signing. So, and I think if you make really clear that you are not willing to sign 2 days before they have to put their application to the relevant organization, health institute or whatever, they are more under pressure to involve you from the very beginning. Because if patient participation should happen, we should be at the table from the very first beginning. And this is really important. And don't let anyone tell you something else, because we made the experience that if you, friendly, but if you are insisting on being part of this trial, being part of the design, bringing in all the informations you get from your patient members, this is really, really important. And of course, focus groups are also important, because this is something we realized, because we work as patient advocates, quite often really focused on research. And to be honest, I am in contact with patients day after day after day. I lose a little bit the feeling of a patient, because I'm in my role. I'm a patient myself, but I'm in the role of a patient advocate. And this is completely different. And I'm really open about this. And so it helps if there are also patients who are only patients, who have an eye on it. And this is possible. And with all those things, with knowledge, with people with lived experience, et cetera, you can give such an important input that more and more researchers recognize that it is worth it, and that they more and more learn to explain things in simple language, to show things like Febe does, because this is really, really complex. And she explained things to our patient advisory board in such an easy but also scientific way that we all thought, okay, now we know what it's all about. And this is not a trial or something like that. This is basic research. And if this is possible, if translational research is possible to be explained and to be influenced by us, I think this is important. Just to have this proud, to stand up there and say, okay, we will be your partner, we are worth it, and we want to be seen. We just don't want to be involved once in a year, because this doesn't make any sense. This is not patient involvement like it should be. And so, yeah, I think if you do all those things, there is a chance. To be really honest, not that like all say, okay, come to us and be part of our research or something like that, but step by step by step. And it's a development over the last 5 years where it's a huge improvement, really huge improvement. And so I think we can do this.
Thank you, Nicolene. It's very important to have your perspective here, because you remind us that you are fighting always for your rights. You are a partner, so not a nice to have. Right. And so you should have the right to be there in the conversation since the beginning, not at the end when it's just give me your opinion. I'm done, but my research project is already written, so you cannot change anything. So yeah, this is very important. Before continuing, because we can go over and over and over, I have so many questions. I also would like the chance to give it back to the floor. And I know that you ask questions. We are also here if you have questions and you want to raise your hand. But I think we will start first with some of the questions from Slido. Yeah, okay. If someone didn't yeah.
Question in person.
Yeah.
Why don't we? No? Okay.
No.
Then I'll go to Slido.
Yeah,
Perfectly. So I just want to say that the most upvoted comments on Slido are dedicated to you, Roxane. So Anonymous, which represents all of us, including me, says congratulations to Roxane. And then Emma says, as an ALK positive patient in the UK, I am so grateful to Roxane. She gives us hope and we will support her research in whatever way we can, which goes to show that involving patients in research goes a long way and goes very well noticed. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
So another great question that came up is, how do you deal with complex shared decision-making when patients and caregivers are presented with the standard of care versus a randomized controlled trial? How do you involve patients in that element of research?
It's even more complicated when you deal with placebo, right?
Yeah.
So it's very hard for somebody to understand that concept and the need for that. Obviously, as clinicians, you select studies that you believe in, that you think have a chance of going wherever they want to go. And this is difficult, particularly in early phase 1, phase 2 trials, where you don't even look for a result, for an outcome. You look for safety, you look for dosing, things like that. So that's really difficult. Compared to standard of care, obviously there needs to be an unmet clinical need that you're fulfilling with that extra that the clinical trials should provide. And it's even more complicated when you talk about issues of health economics, where we're not doing this, but we should, which is compare therapies that are similar. And if we're going to pay more for a therapy that is similar to another therapy that's already standard of care, what are we getting out of that? And that's also very complicated. But it's all about communicating. This goes all the way to why individuals will take legal action against a physician or a hospital. It's mostly about communication. It's not communicating properly, and this is sometimes very difficult when the news is not good, when there's bad news, when things are not going well, and that's a difficult part. But you try to explain, there's something that we are not meeting with current standard of care, and this is why this clinical trial exists, and this is why I can offer you an alternative to that. And the placebo has to be explained thoroughly. That's
Absolutely.
very difficult, especially because people become very skeptical, and I've had patients drop out of clinical trials convinced that they were on placebo. They don't feel a difference. They don't feel that they're improving, and so the automatic response is, I must have gotten placebo, and I'm dropping out. So if you don't have the communication, you don't have the trust. And if you don't have the trust, people drop out.
Thank you very much for that answer. Shall we take another one? Nicoline?
No, it was just...
Yeah, she asked if there's placebo in cancer research, and there is.
My understanding is
Usually
yes.
added on, right? So you can't withdraw you can't do a trial where there's, right, where it's ethically unacceptable that you would deny somebody treatment that's already effective. But when it's add-on therapy, right, you have a standard of care plus something else. Let's say immunotherapy plus chemotherapy or something.
Just to make this clear
Right.
that it's
Right.
not only placebo in cancer.
No.
Well, there is, for example, in indications that are not clear. So, for example, in lung cancer, it would be neoadjuvant therapy. So where you give immunotherapy before surgical resection. If there's no proven benefit, then you can do a trial where there's placebo versus the treatment, right? If there's a proven benefit of something already, you can't obviously deny that. You have to add on to that.
Yeah. Shall we take another one?
Yes, go ahead.
There's a couple questions that might be for Roxane and Phoebe. So someone asked, basic research doesn't provide a solution in nearby time. You give us a timeline of 10, 15 years. That, however, is the main reason patients engage in trials. How can we get them, I'm guessing the meaning is, how can we get them to engage in basic trials given this long timeline? Given that they might not even be the beneficiaries of that outcome.
I think with the trial, you're already past the basic research.
Yeah.
So then you already have a compound, you already have something that you think will benefit the patient. The part where we work is usually retrospective cohorts. We dig in archives for patient material and study that. We don't actually include patients to participate in our study. That's not how it works. So that's also why I think a lot of researchers may feel disconnected, because they don't have to actively recruit patients into their study. And that's also why there's a discrepancy there. Yeah.
Can I add that? I would argue that patients are empathy comes from knowing what you're going through and wanting other people not to go through that, or have something that's better than what they went through. And so it's the lack of empathy comes from indifference generally. So ironically, it's the people who are not suffering that are indifferent, but the patients, they want to help.
Yeah.
They want to help other people who are going through or are going to go through the same thing that they're going through. So if you tell them, look, there may be something here with spatiotemporal analysis, and if you give us part of your tumor, literally, this might help somebody 20 years down the line. You rarely see somebody not be altruistic when they've gone through this, because they have that empathy. It's the people who don't have the problem that are totally indifferent and might not want to collaborate or.
Yeah. One more?
Like we prepared some warm-up questions, but this is more for the audience.
Any other questions from the audience in person? Yeah, we have a question at the back. Yeah.
Hello, thank you so much for this discussion. My name is Lavinia McGee. I'm a lung cancer nurse from the UK. And back in the late 90s, early 2000s, I was a research nurse on clinical trials. So everything you're saying really echoes with that experience. But in particular regarding communication, it's communications with patients and their families that is so important, and the role of the research nurse was really key in that, regarding recruitment and really having truly informed consent when engaging in a clinical trial. But regarding communication, what really amazed me was things like clinical trial. Some patients thought clinical trial means trial as in endurance, like a trial, like a court trial, like their perception of, so we're going to put you through a clinical trial to get the outcome. And when they were thinking of research, it was, do you mean mice and rats? So I guess it's having that sort of, making it really common language. Others, we've actually discussed it here between yesterday, and some perceptions are that is from film, where trials are really dangerous. So we've tried to make it really have information sheets, not about cancer, not about lung cancer, but really having that trials exist and that you should always ask about them, and also don't be upset or put upon if you are asked. So if in your consultation trials come up, don't be surprised, because it's the only way we learn, it's the only way we move forward. So I'm just really wondering that in your, like, what's worked, what hasn't worked, have you found anything that has helped?
Thank you very much, Lavinia.
That's a great point. I had never heard of the trial, but you're absolutely right. And this goes to the rhetoric of cancer and, fighting the war. All of this is useless. And in my view, it's harmful because you're not fighting. And you can't fight yourself. I mean, that whole rhetoric, I think, is a mistake. It's been used a lot, and I think we have to move away from that. That individuals who have a cancer have to fight it like it's their own body. I mean, right? They want to get healthy. They don't want to fight a war, and that whole rhetoric is the problem. Yeah.
Great, thank you
So
so much.
I try to avoid using those kinds of terms, but I never thought of the trial part. You're absolutely right. It sounds awful. Yeah, so study is better.
I'm going to stick to the theme of communication with another question for you, Phoebe. How do you explain and translate your complex research to patients, and do you think they really understand what their involvement is? I mean, there are entire master's degrees in science communication, so it's a big question to ask of you in like 30 seconds or less, but how do you do it?
I
And
have
do
no
people
idea. I
understand
just
it?
try my best. I have no communication training or whatever. I just try my best, and I think, how can you explain it? And I try to think about the most simple way I can come up with. And also, it's leaving out detail is probably key, because I could tell you all about all the technological, advances and machines that we use, and but I think that's then I'm losing you. So,
Roxane, any tips and tricks that you use, and how do you make sure that the folks you speak to understand the science?
Well, I think especially when working with a focus group, they're there to help you, so it's your job to help them so that they can help you. And I think from my clinical background, I feel like maybe I have a bit more experience talking with patients, but also my dad was very confused about all of it. So I feel like I've had a lot of practice over the last 2 years just trying to talk him through every stage and let me explain a PET scan again and things like that. So I think that definitely helped. But at the end of the day, I think it's just more practice.
I think it's also mastery. When you understand something very well, you're able to explain it in its simplest, most elegant way. So give yourself some credit where much credit is due. One last question before we wrap up. So I think this one will be for you, Nicoline. So what could be the role of patient and civil organizations to improve the access of underrepresented groups of population in research?
Again, try to be involved as often as much as you can in clinical trials, and be pretty aware of which groups you want to support. Why do you have them to support them in this special case? And normally they are all underserved in trials, like older people, like people with comorbidities or things like that. But to make clear that there is a need in this patient group, this is really, really important. And don't let anyone tell you that they can't do it, because there are already trials by pharma companies who look at older people and things like that. So it's no longer, it's not possible, we can't do this, because this is quite often an argument. We need this and that person group to make this trial as useful as possible. It is possible to have several cohorts, even if this is not the thing people like to do. But I think insisting in this and maybe bringing the perspectives of those patient groups into the dialogue is really, really important, and it is doable, at least.
Thank you so much for that answer. I'd like to hand it back to Chiara to continue this.
I think I would just want to thank all of you for bringing your perspective, but also the audience. At the end of the day, we made it for you. So I'm really happy you participate in it, you ask your questions, and they remain available. So if you have more, there is a break, and we are here. And yeah, thank you, Sarah, for moderation. And I think, yeah, we can close it. Yeah, thank you.